And now it's time to take a look at the stories making headlines in our weekend newspapers. To help me do that, I'm joined by the foreign editor at Independent Newspapers, Shannon Ebrahim. Shannon, thank you so much for driving all the way from Pretoria to be with us in the studio. I do appreciate it. Let's start with your paper. It says there that the judiciary is corrupt. Now, we know that the judiciary historically has come under attack from different organizations, from the African National Congress to the EFF. In Women's Month, the EFF attacked two judges where they said the one ruling that went against them, they said the judge was racist because she was white. And in the other, where the judge was black and a female, they said that judgment is not her, she's struggling to read it, and they effectively called her an illiterate. And they got away with it because the fraternity itself was quiet. And then, of course, also we now have Judge Sariti's credibility being drawn into question as a result of setting aside of that findings. How do we deal with allegations or perceptions, as is outlined in the story in the Sunday Independent, about the judiciary's independence, Shannon?
Well, Karima, I think when there are those allegations that the judiciary or the Judicial Services Commission is corrupt, I think the spokesperson for Chief Justice Mogoeng made a good point, that if those allegations are made, then perhaps criminal charges should be brought against them to test them. So it's quite dangerous to level allegations that South Africa is acting, our judiciary, like a banana republic, or that our judges are not acting fairly, that probably this needs to be tested in court. Because generally we tend to think that we have a very independent and vociferous judiciary. So if those allegations are made, they should probably be pursued.
Absolutely. And of course the best way to test the judiciary is to look at the actual rulings, because there's certain rules that they have to adhere to, and that's where you can see whether they have applied the law properly or not. Let's take a look at the Sunday Times here. It says Mayor's mystery tender, and this of course deals with the capital, the administrative capital of South Africa, Tshwane, and we've seen there the DA-EFF coalition coming under a lot of pressure. We had the Glad Africa tender. Now this story talks about a trip to China. Tell us a little bit more about it, and what do you make of it, Shannon?
Well, it's quite interesting because it seems to be there's now more and more a disjuncture between the Tshwane mayor, Stevens Mokgalapa, and his DA party, basically. They say that he didn't get permission to travel to China. He had only requested it a day before, and that he was actually sponsored and wined and dined by Huawei. And at the same time now, the city of Tshwane has put out a tender of 1 billion rand for basically a smart city, the products of which seem to suit Huawei's products. So it's quite interesting that the DA is now challenging their own mayor, and yes. I think that we haven't seen much of that in the past.
It's a very interesting phenomenon because we all know that the DA, as much as it struggled and didn't do well in the last election, it has been growing exponentially. And many of us as political analysts have said, as they grow, the problems internally will grow. And we've already seen factions in the DA, pretty much like we've seen in the ANC. And now you have factions around governance as well. This is inescapable for any party that takes over actual cities. Do you think it's one of the reasons the EFF just likes to kind of fold their arms and be in the opposition and not really take responsibility or take any posts in places, even where they are kingmakers, because you literally don't have to do much. You can just sit back and criticize.
Exactly. It's always much harder to govern. And I think the DA always likes to pride itself on the idea that it would have clean governance. So if this tender gives the impression of irregularity, that's a problem for the party. So they're caught now in a difficult situation.
Absolutely. Let's look at the City Press. Now, the City Press is a story that we have covered before inside the SABC's soccer drama. I had Mr. Makatini, the chair of the board, here about 2 weeks ago, and he explicitly said to me that they will not enter into contracts that do not make financial sense for them, like their predecessors. And it looks as as if there is an utter battle going down at the SABC for control over the PSL games, and of course the other private giant, which is MultiChoice, which is a monopoly, is in fact involved. What do you make of the details of that story, considering that we still don't have a bailout for the SABC, by the way?
Well, it's quite interesting because it seems MultiChoice had wanted 280 million rand paid for 144 games, and the deal that has been reached is 72 million. And I think the new board is trying to ensure that they can cut their cloth according to their means. But I think, as you have said in the past, there's been an unholy alliance between the SABC and MultiChoice in the past.
So if MultiChoice was not prepared to accept lower rates, what do you think could have been the incentive for them to accept 72 million and not the original price?
I'm not quite sure what would have motivated that.
Yeah, I would like our investigative journalists to take up the gauntlet that we've thrown to them to look at exactly who's making that deficit up. And then, of course, there's the question of the actual bailout at the SABC. What we also heard, breaking news last week, the SABC is going to court, and it's in the front page story there, to have the Labour Court to have about 28 staff members, their promotions and jobs set aside. They've been now accused by those affected of initiating a witch hunt. Many people thought that the new board, the new head of news and so on, was going to introduce stability at Auckland Park. Do you see that happening, considering how much money, patronage and politics are actually intertwined at the public broadcaster?
Well, I think this process of getting rid of what people are calling the ghosts of Hladi Motsoaleng is very important. And we must remember that those 28 people that they want fired, who they believe were aligned and they weren't brought in properly, either they didn't have the qualifications or the skills, they're only 28 of 120 supposedly irregular appointments at the SABC. So to me, this is the beginning of trying to get rid of the rot, and it's an important process. And obviously those affected would be very unhappy with it. But this is what we expected to see from a new SABC board.
Absolutely, but also that people weren't necessarily going to go quietly, that they weren't necessarily going to not fight back. What other stories caught your attention today, Shannon? One of the stories that caught my attention is the former finance MEC in the Northwest Province that is now facing or has been arrested in relation to a contract linking the administration to the Guptas. Did that story catch your eye at all?
That story didn't appear actually in the city press, but on the online version, so I focused on the newspapers. But I do think it's very interesting that we're seeing an arrest, because there's been so few arrests of those found to be, aligned with the Guptas. So it's a good start.
So I mean, the Northwest and the Free State have been the two kind of poster childs, if you like, of provinces where corruptions and malfeasance have happened. We saw at the Zondo Commission of Inquiry the detail coming out of Estina. If one is to look between the lines here, do you actually think that we are on the cusp of turning the corner, that we're going to have more and more people being arrested soon?
It seems that the wheels of justice are turning perhaps too slowly, but I think that we can be heartened by what the Zondo Commission has exposed already. And we saw Zondo saying this week that the 100 million already spent in the last year is not going to be wasted. And we know that, for example, the Sariti Commission costs 137 million. So a lot more money will be poured into this process. But I think the NPA needs to be much more robust now in actually the evidence that has come out of these commissions, that they start to act on it.
Absolutely. That's, of course, all we have time for. Thank you very much, Shannon. One of the stories that caught my eye, that I'm sure will set the agenda for this week, is the fact that the Speaker of the National Assembly has asked the Justice Committee to fast-track the discussion and debate around the Public Protector's fitness to hold office. And I'm sure that's going to make news as we go into this week. That's your fix of this week. Take care. See you again next week.
I guess I always knew that I was going to